شیشه شکیات دیگه.
Like this video, subscribe, comment, and share it. It helps serious reporting reach more people, especially when the subject is war. I am Sophie Edward, and you are watching my channel, Sophie Edward. Tonight we are tracking what is being described as an escalating air campaign over Iran's capital. Tehran is burning in multiple locations, and the most unsettling detail is not only the damage, it is the reaction in some of the footage coming out of the country. In several clips, you do not hear grief, you hear cheering, you hear anger directed at the regime, you hear people who sound like they believe this is the beginning of an end. This is not a victory story, it is a dark snapshot of a state under pressure, and a population that appears deeply divided from the system ruling it. For the past 3 days, the United States and Israel have been described as conducting a relentless series of precision strikes. The claims focus on regime-linked sites, IRGC command locations, police facilities and missile-related storage areas are repeatedly named as targets. The language used by observers is blunt. They say sites were hit so hard they were effectively erased. On the ground, that translates into shockwaves, secondary explosions, and sudden gaps where fortified compounds used to stand. The operation is being framed not as random destruction, but as the removal of specific tools the state uses to project force. That distinction matters, because the regime's survival has always depended on its ability to police its own streets and protect its military infrastructure. If those pillars are weakened at the same time, the center can start to crack. Iran's leadership has moved quickly to control what the outside world can see. In the middle of this bombardment, the country has again been pushed into a sweeping internet blackout, cutting ordinary people off from platforms where evidence spreads fast. That blackout is not only about security, it is about hiding humiliation, because the most damaging images for the Islamic Republic are not the explosions, they are the moments after, when some citizens record the strikes and react with celebration, not sorrow. The regime does not want the world to hear that sound. It does not want the world to measure how much resentment has accumulated over decades. When the network goes dark, it is not only communications that disappear, it is the regime's fear that the truth will travel faster than its propaganda. There is also a competing narrative pushing through the chaos. Some accounts online insist these are strikes on residential areas, but the clips that circulate most widely often show people identifying the targets as regime installations, police stations, missile sites, headquarters. The reason that detail matters is simple. If the strikes are focused on security infrastructure, then the message is not collective punishment. The message is dismantling, and you can often tell what the local witnesses believe, just from their tone. In multiple recordings, the voices behind the camera sound relieved, even joyful. That does not mean the situation is safe or clean. It means that for some Iranians, the institutions being hit are not seen as protection, they are seen as the machinery of repression. There is another reality shaping how this story is told on platforms like YouTube. War footage is frequently restricted, videos can be demonetized, and when that happens, distribution often shrinks. That creates a quiet incentive to look away, but the public record still matters, especially when governments are trying to erase it. So this kind of reporting often becomes an archive, a single place where scattered clips are gathered, time-stamped by context, and preserved while the internet inside the country is throttled or shut down. That is also why your engagement matters, not as a gesture but as a signal that serious viewers still want documentation, even when it is grim. If you want this channel to keep covering stories like this, support it with a like and a subscription now. What we are receiving from inside Iran is almost certainly a fraction of what is happening. With connectivity cut for days at a time, the only material that escapes tends to come from the small percentage of people who still have a pathway out. That can mean foreign SIM access near borders or satellite internet that bypasses state control. In past crackdowns, satellite tools like Starlink have been described as one of the few remaining channels for some Iranians to communicate when nationwide restrictions hit. But the risk is severe, and many people stay silent to survive. The result is an information bottleneck. It distorts perception, it delays verification, and it gives the state time to rewrite the narrative for domestic audiences. Freedom House describes Iran's online environment as among the world's most restrictive, with censorship and shutdowns used to suppress dissent. When we zoom out, Tehran is not the only place being hit. Reports and circulating footage point to operations in cities outside the capital, including Karaj. The pattern remains consistent. Targets are described as telecommunications nodes, IRGC command posts, special forces facilities, and police stations. That mix is not accidental. Communications infrastructure matters because it is how the state coordinates response and controls information. Security compounds matter because they are how the state applies pressure at street level. In some of the recordings from Karaj, the reaction is raw and furious. People do not speak like supporters of the system. They speak like citizens who believe they have been trapped for decades. The language is often too profane to repeat, but the meaning is clear. For many, the institutions being struck are the same institutions they associate with surveillance, arrests, and fear. Another set of clips comes from Sanandaj, in Iran's Kurdistan region. This area has a long history of tension with the central government, and residents have faced repeated crackdowns across generations. In that context, the reaction captured on video can look less like support for foreign powers and more like hatred for local enforcers. When strikes land, some people sound as if they are watching a hated symbol collapse. That is a dangerous emotional moment because it reveals how thin the regime's legitimacy may be in certain regions. A state can survive hardship, sanctions, and even war, but it struggles to survive open contempt from parts of its own population, especially when those parts believe they have nothing left to lose. The blackout makes it harder to measure scale, but the fragments we do see suggest the regime's internal fractures are not theoretical. As these days of strikes add up, one target category stands out: police facilities, multiple police sites across multiple cities in a short time window. This does not look random. Police stations are not only law enforcement buildings in Iran's system, they are often the front door of repression. They are the places linked to raids, detentions, beatings, and the initial suppression of protests. When those facilities are hit, the message is strategic. It says the state's ability to control crowds is being reduced. It also says that if people pour into the streets later, the regime may not have the same tools to crush them quickly. That is why the pattern matters more than any single explosion. The campaign, as described by its supporters, is about disabling the regime's internal security spine. This brings us to the regime's most sensitive fear: mass protest that cannot be contained. In the reference claims circulating with this footage, police sites are linked directly to the crackdown on January demonstrations. Some opposition-aligned accounts allege that as many as 30,000 Iranians were killed during repression tied to protests, a figure that is difficult to verify independently under blackout conditions, but which reflects the scale of anger many feel. The core point remains: these security forces are seen by many citizens not as protectors, but as executioners of the regime's will. If that apparatus is degraded, it changes the political geometry inside the country. It can create openings. It can also create chaos. And it is why the strikes on police and paramilitary infrastructure are being interpreted by many as groundwork for an internal push, not merely a military exchange. The Basij is not a side detail in Iran's security map. It is designed to be everywhere, and to make sure the regime can respond fast when dissent spreads. It operates under the IRGC, with local branches that can mobilize in neighborhoods, universities, workplaces, and streets. That reach is why a strike on a Basij base is not just a military hit. It is a psychological one. It signals that the regime's most familiar instruments of intimidation are no longer untouchable. And it explains why some of the loudest reactions in these clips come right after sites linked to internal control are struck. People are not reacting to a distant battlefield. They are reacting to structures they associate with arrests, beatings, and fear. The USIP Iran primer describes the Basij as a volunteer paramilitary force under the IRGC, with major internal security and law enforcement roles across the country. That is the system now being tested from the air. In parallel, outside analysts tracking reported targets describe a widening focus on the repression architecture itself. That includes Basij bases, IRGC sites tied to internal security, and police facilities embedded in urban areas. The point, as presented by supporters of this campaign, is to degrade the regime's ability to clamp down quickly if protests surge. The regime appears to understand that risk. Reporting notes statements from security bodies warning that the next phase could involve street unrest, and that anyone seen as disrupting security will be treated as cooperating with an enemy. That kind of language is not about foreign aircraft. It is about domestic control. It is about keeping people indoors, disconnected and afraid at the exact moment they might otherwise flood the streets. The argument being made by US and Israeli sources is that precision is the entire point, not only to reduce wasted force, but to create a clear chain between target and purpose. CENTCOM's own language is explicit. It says strikes prioritized locations that posed an imminent threat, including IRGC command and control, air defense capabilities, and missile and drone launch sites, as well as military airfields. It also describes precision munitions launched from air, land, and sea, and notes the use of low-cost one-way attack drones for the first time in combat. That is a modern strike package built for speed and repetition, not a single headline event. It is meant to keep pressure constant and to keep the regime reacting rather than organizing. We also see the information strategy around these strikes. Official accounts release curated aerial footage, reticles centered on compounds, and sequences that show a specific object hit and then destroyed. Business Insider described US Central Command footage showing missiles launched at sea, carriers launching aircraft, and repeated strikes on Iranian military targets, presented as an overwhelming and unrelenting blow. The visuals are not just evidence, they are messaging. They are meant to show capability, restraint in targeting, and inevitability over time. In a conflict where Iran tries to control perception through shutdowns, video becomes its own battlefield, and the side that can publish, verify, and repeat footage often shapes what the world believes is happening. Now we reach the warning that shifts this from a 3-day campaign into something potentially far larger. President Trump told CNN that the big wave has not happened yet, and that the United States has not even started hitting Iran hard. Reuters quoted him saying, "The big one is coming soon." That is not a signal of restraint. It is a signal of escalation. It also frames the strikes as a prelude, not a climax. Source: in that framing, the goal is to cripple the regime's ability to function, then leave the decisive moment to Iranians themselves. Subscribe to my channel Sophie Edward, comment your thoughts and share this video, because the world is about to see what happens when a government loses control of both its skies and its streets, and nobody can say how it ends.